So I'd like
Great.
to thank everyone for joining. This is the Central Coast meeting for the Power and Nature Coalition, and today we have a speaker from NRDC, Bella Sullivan. And let me just give a quick intro to Bella and then the topic. And Bella, will let you go ahead and jump off that diving board that I will have set up for you. So Bella has been working with the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC as they call themselves, and has a bachelor's degree in ocean, climate, and atmospheric science, which sounds really cool, and a master's in environmental communications from Stanford. And you're up at the San Francisco office from NRDC, from what I understand. And right now you're really deeply focused on illegal fishing, which happens on coastal states. And right now we have the 30 by 30 work that's being done both on the salty side, which is what California Natural Resources Agency calls it, the ocean protection side, as well as the land side. And so, because the Central Coast is kind of reforming, trying to get its bearings, we thought it would be super helpful to get a presentation and an understanding of what's happening on the marine side. So, that's the context for setting this up. And I do want to thank Bella for coordinating this with me. We did it back in September. And the focus of today's conversation then is about the opportunities for 30 by 30 as it relates to California's oceans and the coast. And one of the tools that is going to be talked about today, I'm sure, is the Marine Protected Areas, or MPAs, if you're not familiar with that acronym. So MPAs are basically one of the key protective mechanisms for the oceans. And we're going to learn a little bit about the network that exists already in California and then other potential protections that exist for the state's waters. So at this point, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Bella, and she knows that the presentation is going to be about 20 minutes. And then, so at about 3:25, we'll have her end, and then we'll do about 10 minutes of Q&A. Folks can go ahead and drop questions into the chat right now while you have them, or wait until the end. And I would encourage everyone to stay on mute if you're not talking so that our recording is as crisp as possible. So Bella, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melanie, for that introduction. Yeah, as Melanie said, my name is Bella Sullivan. I'm with NRDC, and today I'm going to be talking about California's MPA network and sort of the opportunity that we have right now to strengthen it. And, this specifically applies to the Central Coast. You being the Central Coast Working Group, because there's actually a lot of petitions that NRDC is actually supporting that are within the Central Coast, which I will touch on more. But yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. Also wanted to note that Ella Merkel from the California Marine Sanctuaries Foundation helped with these slides. So just shouting her out there, even though she can't be with us. But anyways, so as I'm sure you're all aware, California's coast has been a biodiversity hotspot for millennia. So for thousands of years, due to coastal upwelling, the magnitude of life, species, and habitats found along the coast have made it a truly exceptional and precious region of the ocean. But in recent history, we are now starting to see unprecedented and accelerating changes in our ocean's health, even here in California. And there is a need now, like never before, to protect our waters in order to preserve and restore the species and habitats that we love and care for. So sort of a breakdown of this presentation, I'm going to talk about what MPAs are and how they work, so sort of touching more on the science of it. Then identify sort of how MPAs can and can't protect our ocean against current emerging stressors. Then sort of look into more about sort of some of the keys to success for MPAs, like how they work well, and then talk about the MPA network here in California and the petition process that we're sort of like right in the middle of, and how you can get involved in that process and sort of help get a good outcome that we're hoping for out of this process. So A marine protected area are essentially like designated areas of the ocean where human activities are restricted to protect marine life and their habitats. And this sort of gives them like a little pocket to just sort of recuperate and not have any disturbances. And MPAs have a lot of varying levels of protection. When I first started getting like clued into this work, brought into this work, I was always a little bit confused about the difference between like a state marine reserve or a state marine conservation area. But essentially, these levels of protection just sort of have different sort of ranges in terms of like what the activities allowed within the MPAs are. And so that means, unlike fisheries management, MPAs protect more than just a target species, because fisheries management is just looking at one species. That MPAs protect the surrounding habitat, both living and not, from disturbances like trawling or development, and they provide sanctuary for all the species within the protected area. And in doing so, they safeguard the natural cycles occurring in the ecosystem, like the transfer of nutrients in the water column. And so, sort of touching back on what the ocean is currently facing, as I'm sure you're all very aware of, there are a plethora of emerging ocean threats, and such as pollution, marine traffic, algal blooms, and industrial fishing. And so we're already seeing those impacts of these threats, including climate change, sort of touching on the marine heat wave or the blob that sort of decimated kelp forests along the West Coast in 2014 to 2019. We're seeing, threats from ocean industrialization and currently, not to ruin everyone's day, but scientists have recently identified another warm water blob forming in the Pacific right now. So these are all sort of things that we're trying to understand, like how can we prepare for these sort of changing conditions, and how can we best equip like our ocean to be able to deal with these impacts. And that's where MPAs come into this. So you might be asking yourself, what can MPAs actually do against all of these like pretty large and looming threats, especially because our MPA network only makes up about 16% of California's coastline. So, how does this actually help? And to start, they can increase resilience to environmental disturbances, or increase an ecosystem's ability to recover after a disruption. So we find that inside MPAs, there are larger populations of species and an increased diversity of species. And these larger populations help produce a greater genetic diversity portfolio. And so when environmental disturbances like disease or, different things like warm water blobs that we're talking about, there's a greater likelihood of individuals who can survive these disturbances within it. And so, yeah, getting on that, buffering the effects of climate change, it really allows them to sort of bounce back after these disturbances within MPAs. And we see that community structures or the different types of species and the way they interact return to pre-heat wave conditions much faster inside marine protected areas than in unprotected areas. What else do MPAs do? They safeguard nutrient cycles. So essentially, by decreasing the number of fish in the water, when there's extractive activities going on, it also reduces the amount of nutrients going on like in that area. And this nutrients is really important for like ecosystems, general health. So when there's an MPA, which reduces the amount of biomass being taken out of an area, this can help with things like keeping kelp healthy and things like that. Additionally, it restores populations that we see. We've seen it in a lot of different examples, and one of them I'll talk about is like the rockfish fisheries. Essentially, after the rockfish fisheries in California all collapsed, and all along the West Coast, we saw that within MPAs, those populations bounded back even after like an extreme collapse. We also see spillover. And so this is sort of a term that's used to describe when, a population within an MPA is rebounding and the population is healthy and in a lot bigger numbers. Obviously, fish don't know where like invisible lines are. So they sort of swim outside of the MPA itself, spilling outside of the MPA, and you see those effects within like their habitat outside of it, and you also see it enhance certain fisheries. So this spillover effect is also really good for fisheries. Like they did a study essentially looking at a 35% reduction in fishing, specifically in lobster, with MPAs sort of like in this area, and it resulted in a 225 percent increase in the lobster catch by like having these areas where the lobsters can rebound. So I've already touched on spillover a bit. And now I'm going to get into sort of what makes MPAs successful. Um, the first thing is size and age. So basically the bigger an MPA is, the more benefits that you're going to see from it. And kind of same can be said for when an MPA has been around longer, you see those effects, take place over this amount of time. So the bigger the MPA is and the sort of the longer that it's been around is going to make it a more successful marine protected area. Additionally, management and level of protection play a large role in how well an MPA will succeed. And essentially, looking at all these different MPAs within California, it sort of showed within the level of protection that a highly or fully protected MPA have better like fish densities and biomass in other protected areas. So as sort of just an overview, MPAs do a lot of amazing things. They increase resilience and help with climate change, and they sort of like help these areas rebound to their natural state and sort of just remove these threats when our ocean's already facing a lot. So these are the things that MPAs don't do. Like I said before, sort of the longer an MPA has been around, the more benefits that we're going to see accrue. So it's not just a quick fix. It's also not a fisheries management tool. Those are, that's targeted on a species, whereas MPAs are targeted on the whole ecosystem. And, MPAs are also not perfect, but this is one of the things that we have currently to be fighting and preparing for the changes ahead. So now I'm going to talk about sort of the policy context and sort of touch on, I keep talking about the MPA network, and so sort of explain what that network actually is, and sort of go into, this opportunity. It's a once in a decade opportunity that we are currently in to help safeguard the future of our ocean. As I've sort of mentioned before, in the past century, we're truly just seeing unprecedented changes in our ocean. I use this slide to sort of explain a bit about like how much our fish are seeing changes and sort of different like key species, including kelp and things like that. And so by the 1990s, people from all walks of life in California were sort of sounding the alarm that the ocean was not doing well. And so this led the state to decide to take action by passing the Marine Life Protection Act, also called the MLPA, in 1999. And so this legislation is what created California's unique marine protected area network. So the MLPA is sort of set out to protect important ecosystems, sustain and rebuild marine species, increase protections for representative and unique habitats, and sort of improve opportunities for recreation, education, and research. And essentially, this MPA network sort of resulted in 124 different marine protected areas that range in level of protection. And it was created to operate as a network. So this is sort of what sets it aside from like other marine protected areas. But this is the only network that exists in the United States that is meant to operate sort of as this cohesive unit. And so that's sort of a thing called connectivity that I'll touch on in a little bit too. And so during the first 10 years of the network, so like they created the network and now, they're trying to figure out how is the network doing? Like, what are things that we can do to make it work better? What are things that are not going well? And so the state did this 10-year study that was just sort of monitoring these different areas and like looking at the changes to better understand how the MPA network is doing. And so this, sort of told us some of the things that I went over today already about, the benefits of marine protected areas, but found that that was specifically happening within California's marine protected area network. And yeah, I feel like the main thing that came out of that really was looking at sort of the ways in which MPAs can really help build like ocean resilience and how important that is in this current moment. And so they also found that there was room for improvement. Like they saw that the network is working, but they also, decided that, that there's more that can be done to help the network sort of operate better. And so when the network was created, there was all these different sort of like scientific guidelines that were, created by the scientists working on it. And they have to do with size of the MPA and spacing between the MPAs. And this sort of goes back to that point about connectivity to make sure that it's like operating as a network. And within the MPA guide, I really like this fact because I think it's fun. But like the max distance between two MPAs that it was recommended is literally the amount of miles that like a juvenile fish, like larva, can float. So it sort of has to do with making sure that there's this connection between these areas that are getting protected. But anyways, they found that there was room for improvement when it comes to the size and spacing components. Um, and so this brings us to our opportunity with the petition process and the adaptive management of the MPA network. And so basically, every 10 years, the state sort of opens it up to different petitions. And these petitions are going to be reviewed in the coming months, but they are going to either like alter the network in some way. So there are some petitions that call to strengthen the network, which is really great and we're trying to do. And then there are some petitions that are actually calling to weaken the network. And so that's also something that is at hand right now. And so I use this term a lot called adaptive management, and sort of just to touch on what that means in terms of the MPA network. Obviously the ocean is changing. We've really established that. So making sure that as the network, continues, that we are sort of making sure that we're keeping up with those changes and adaptively managing this whole process. And so sort of to go more into the petition process, like I said before, right now, the California Fish and Game Commission is considering petitions submitted by the public to update and change the MPA network. And so these petitions could be submitted by literally any member of the public. There's ones that are submitted by tribes, different organizations, etc. So right now, we are essentially just like in this process. It started about a year and a half ago, I'd say, maybe almost 2 years ago. And we're sort of coming to the tail end of when the Fish and Game Commission is going to review these petitions and sort of decide if they're going to designate them or not. And so what would these petitions do? So these are some of just like a couple examples of what some of the petitions that are trying to strengthen the network would call for. And to go even more specific, right now NRDC has two different petitions that we submitted that we co-sponsor with other orgs and tribes. And so just to give a very brief overview, they're both located in the Central Coast, sort of in the Santa Barbara County region. But one is co-sponsored with the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians and the Environmental Defense Center, and is trying to protect Rocky Reef area and persistent kelp forest. And the other one, Point Sal, is co-sponsored with the Northern Chumash Tribal Council and is trying to protect this area that's a really important haul-out site for pinnipeds and seabirds. And so both proposals call for tribal co-management and sort of like I was saying before, would strengthen the network as a whole by filling in gaps between the other MPAs. And so, sort of, how does this? I haven't really touched on this yet today, but this very largely directly is related to California's 30 by 30 initiative. And I'm sure this is like an initiative that folks have heard of on this call, obviously, because we're Power Nature. But essentially, when on the ocean side, 30 by 30, sort of looking at pathways to get to 30 by 30, adaptive management of the MPA network is like listed as one of the main four ways. However, we've been seeing sort of a lot of reluctance from CNRA to essentially consider the adaptive management process as like a driver of 30 by 30. And so it's been, definitely a challenge because they've been trying to sort of separate these two processes, even though creating new marine protected areas through this process is like truly one of the only options we have right now for actually adding new protections along the coast. And so, just to give more information about the petition process, this is sort of a timeline of where we're at right now. And we're about to be heading into sort of like the make or break it point, especially in the spring, which I will touch on in a little bit as well. And so, some of the challenges within this process, basically, we're seeing, a lot of reluctance from the Fish and Game Commission to want to strengthen the network. Basically, only two of the five commissioners vote conservation minded. And since they are the five people that decide on these petitions, that has been a very big challenge. Then there's also been a lot of organized opposition, specifically from commercial and some recreational fishermen. There's also we've been seeing within the Fish and Game Commission a lot of bias against non-consumptive ocean stakeholders. Like, obviously, there's a wide array of people that, have a deep connection to and like with the ocean. And sort of we're seeing the people that are not using it as consumptive purposes not getting as how to say, like, there's just been a bias against that in the commission meetings. And then we're also seeing sort of the state's reluctance to see the adaptive management process as part of 30 by 30. And I can also answer more questions once it's done on like why that's a big problem. And then lastly, the OPC sort of released this roadmap that still is counting areas of low protection served within 30 by 30's framework. And so we're really worried about that too, because, like I said before in this presentation, like level of protection has a lot to do with what areas are actually going to have durable conservation. And so that's also been a very big problem. And so this is how you can help. So learn more about active petitions near you. Write or sign on to a letter to the Fish and Game Commission supporting the strengthening of the network or specific petitions. You can comment at Fish and Game Commission meetings, either in Zoom or in person. And you can just spread the word to your family and friends and community. Like, the more people that know about this, the better. So we're really just trying to get the word out that we're in this really pivotal moment right now. And sort of lastly, like I said before, this is all sort of coming to a head in the spring. And so there's going to be 4 different meetings that are held in each region of the coast. And this will be when the Fish and Game Commission decides on these petitions. And so we're trying to get as many people in the room to support the conservation petitions, because public support is going to be truly pivotal for this moment. And with that, I will open up the floor to questions. I know that was a lot of information, so I welcome any and all questions at this point.
So, Bella, thank you so much for your time and your presentation. For those that are interested, we'll have this recording available hopefully in the next 24, 48 hours up on YouTube. And then you can access it there if you want to watch it again, or if somebody missed it, they can watch it. But we'll go ahead and close this part of the meeting out.